We're going to talk now with NewsNation contributor Lindsey Granger and congressional reporter for TheHill.com, Mychael Schnell. Good morning, ladies. Thanks for joining us. Great to see you.
Good morning.
Lindsey, starting with you, how significant is the G7 summit for President Biden's re-election bid, particularly as he can now point to this new security deal with Ukraine?
I think he's trying to firmly plant his feet in the fact that he has foreign policy issues under control. And I think that he also needs to show the world leaders that he is going to follow in the footsteps of some of the policies that they enjoyed under President Obama, to reiterate that and try to explain to everybody that he has some control in that territory. Because the truth is, we know that if Trump wins the presidency in November, a lot of these policies that he's talking about, even some of the $50 billion in funding that is going to Ukraine, might not make it all the way to them, because President Trump has been adamant critic of NATO and then also of how much money we're sending to Ukraine. So I think he's just over there trying to let everybody know, I have things under control, even though the world, after the economy, is looking at this as one of the top issues that's sending them to the polls.
Yeah, well, a lot of unpopular leaders are there. One of the headlines I was reading was a group of losers or something like that. Let's take a look at these approval ratings. And President Joe Biden is, really struggling here at home as well. So do these photo ops with world leaders really help Biden as much as he would hope?
Well, I think there's a conversation to be had, because on the one hand, if he doesn't show face, that would be a terrible decision on the world stage. But on the other hand, when there's people in our country, like you mentioned, that are already complaining about what Biden has done or what he has articulated that he has done at the very least, and they are feeling the impacts of inflation and a poor economy and want to know exactly what's happening on our soil with immigration, and to see him overseas getting some other things done without what some people would say putting America as the priority could constantly be a linchpin for him. So, that's something that he has to consider. But, as the president of the United States, I think it's imperative that he showed up at G7.
Right. Well, former President Trump will be talking in Florida later today after saying there's great unity among Republicans following meetings there with lawmakers on Capitol Hill for the first time since the attack there, January 6th. But when asked Trump about Maryland GOP Senate candidate Larry Hogan about whether he would like for him to win, he said yes, he would. But Hogan is a fierce critic of his, didn't vote in 2016 or 2020 for him, and refused to reciprocate this endorsement. So, Mychael, is the GOP really as unified as Trump is saying?
Well, he and other rank-and-file Republicans and Republican leaders, Anna, certainly want to put off the image that they are united. But of course, you're always going to have these squabbles within the conference that, ideologically speaking, is so divided. You have moderates and more traditionalist conservatives, especially when you talk about foreign policy, who are now facing off against this more MAGA isolationist wing of the Republican Party. So zeroing in on Hogan, this has been a particularly interesting situation because, of course, Larry Hogan, known for his criticism of former President Trump, saying that he didn't support him in 2016 nor in 2020, or does he plan to support him in 2024. We also saw Republicans really pounce at Larry Hogan right before the Manhattan jury handed down the conviction of former President Trump. He urged folks to respect the verdict regardless of what the outcome was. Republicans had jumped on that, arguing that it shouldn't be that way, that this was a politicized prosecution of the former president. So this is really sort of a 180 for former President Trump and his team, but I think it's a really strategic one because Maryland is such a key state when you talk about the Senate map and Senate Republicans trying to take the majority of that chamber. It's a blue state that Republicans have a chance of flipping this cycle. Larry Hogan, the very popular former governor of the old line state. So I think that, it's gotten to Trump through his head. Maybe people like Steve Daines, the NRSC chair, have spoken to him to say that, look, Maryland is a key state. Larry Hogan is a great candidate in that state. If you think you're going to be president and want to have a Senate majority, backing Larry Hogan is a critical piece of that puzzle. So, while there may not be all that unity when you look really deep inside the Republican Party, they're absolutely trying to have this facade of it in the lead up to the November elections.
Yeah.
Thanks for watching, everybody. Go to joinnn.com to find NewsNation on your television provider. Also, don't forget to click that red subscribe button below to get more of NewsNation's fact-driven, unbiased coverage.